The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Talk to Our Expert series. Today we're going to talk about using Merlin's Workflow Engine for multi-channel distribution and other tasks. So thanks for joining us today. As always, this will be short and sweet. It'll be less than 30 minutes for sure. I am recording this session, so we will make it available on our website and YouTube page. Please ask your questions in the chat window. I will try and go check on the chat window periodically. And your questions do not need to be related to today's topic. As a third thing, or as another thing, not a third thing, as another thing, if you have ideas for a chat session, things that you would like to learn about related to Merlin and digital asset management, please let us know. We'd be happy to hear your suggestions and present what you want to hear. So what is the Merlin Workflow Engine? It is an optional module, so there is an extra charge for it, and it can perform many tasks. It allows for these different tasks to be stacked on top of each other so that you can have one task trigger another task, which triggers another task, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of detail as we talk about the types of tasks that we can do in Merlin. It also allows for conditional triggers for tasks. This means that the tasks that are triggered can be automatic based on maybe something being output or maybe something being uploaded and it would trigger a task, or they can be manual based upon a user actually checking a box or entering a specific piece of metadata. So what is a workflow? A workflow consists of three primary parts. It's a triggering event. As I kind of alluded to, it might be you entering something in on the keyboard in Merlin or checking a box, or it might be something being uploaded or something being downloaded or a specific asset being edited. And that triggering event can basically cause a sequence of activities to occur. And we'll describe what some of those activities might be. And in the end, something happens, whether it's different versions of the photo being output maybe for the web and for a printed brochure, or content being tagged and people being notified by email. And so in this sense, a workflow is kind of like a recipe where you've got a series of ingredients, a process, and an output, in which we're going to bake a cake. In Merlin, the process of creating a workflow consists of assembling the set of activities into the sequence of operations that you want to perform. So before one thing can happen, something may need to happen before that, and something may need to happen before that. So before you get to Z, you might have to go through A, B, C, D, E, and the entire alphabet before you get to the end of the alphabet. And so you can create this sequence of activities. Each step in the sequence has a set of options that you can select to fill in or to customize the workflow. And I'm going to actually show you one of our workflows and show you how it can be customized and what it's kind of doing behind the scenes. It's a little bit overwhelming, but it's not programming. Well, I guess it is kind of programming, but you don't need to be a programmer to make this work. So then you decide what trigger causes the workflow to execute. And again, you can see what data it has to work with based on that specific trigger. So everything is kind of interrelated. And then you get to decide what the outputs of the process will be. So here's some examples of some workflow engine processes. And actually, we have some customers that are using a lot of these. So for example, you can have Merlin remove specific metadata at the time of output, including EXIF data. So some of our customers, they're very sensitive about including GPS coordinates in their photos when they're shared. And so Merlin actually strips out the EXIF data, or it could be any of the metadata. And again, you can control what metadata, whether it's all of it or just a specific field, or rather than stripping it out, maybe it gets replaced with something specific. So that's an example of a workflow. You can add predefined metadata at the time of output. We kind of alluded to that. You can create a sidecar file on export with metadata. So it might be that the system you're working with requires that metadata be delivered in a CSV file and not in the file itself. And so that's something that we can do. You can convert to multiple formats all at once. Now, in the new version of Merlin, as most of you probably have seen, you can choose at the time of output what you want the file format to be. You can convert a file to a TIFF or to a PNG or to a JPEG or to a PDF or even a Microsoft PSD file. Well, imagine having that done all automatically for you all at once. So you output a file and Merlin basically creates all of the different file formats in many different sizes all at once. This is the way we add watermarks to the high-resolution version of the file. As you know, Merlin has the ability to add a watermark to the large thumbnail at the time of import, and that kind of protects your thumbnails in Merlin as they're being displayed. But now we can add watermarks to the high-res file at the time of export. And again, the watermark could be different depending upon your export destination. The workflow engine can also send emails to a predefined individual, and it can also move content around in collections, and I'll show you an example of that. So that's kind of a cool thing. So here's kind of an example of a workflow spelled out in a graph form, and you can see that's me on the left-hand side, and I've lost some weight, so that's my stick figure. And the user would basically select a file to output, and Merlin queues the output request to the output service, which is what handles outputs in Merlin these days. And that output service says, oh, I need to send an event off to the workflow engine. And so it does that. And the workflow engine receives the event and then basically dispatches the associated workflow back to Merlin. So in this case, that associated workflow, and I'm going to show this to you, resizes the asset and applies a watermark. And then the output service takes that file and sends it to the predefined output destination. Okay, so that's kind of, this is exactly what I'm going to show you. So that's enough of our slides. So let's do this. Let's launch my browser. And we're in Merlin now. So this is my demo Merlin, as always. I'm going to go ahead and make the type a little bit larger. And so let's say I've got this nice picture of Horseshoe Bend that I made last week while I was on vacation in northern Arizona. And I want this picture to be output in a variety of different formats with different watermarks. So in my workflow palette, which for those of you that are familiar with Merlin, you know that the workflow palette is something that we previously referred to as server targets, but now it's much more than just server targets. So if I drag this file to my server target called CMS and print queues, again, I can apply some options here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to output it. And so, and there you see that Merlin's telling me, oh, I've initiated this workflow. And in the background, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So in this particular case, it's outputting the file as a PNG file at 1,000 pixels across. So I'm reducing it in size, and it's putting a watermark on it. And then it's delivering it to a Dropbox folder I have set up. And it's also taking that same file and outputting it as a JPEG and delivering it to another Dropbox folder, all with a watermark in a different location, all at the same time. So let me show you what that looks like inside of the workflow engine. Okay, so I'm in my workflow engine, and I don't want to dig too deep into this because it's real easy to get into the weeds on this, but I've got this one particular workflow in my workflow tab that I've selected, and you can see it's got a brief description of what's happening here on the left-hand side of all of these different workflows. And on the right-hand side, it's actually showing me the activity sequence, right? So these are the steps that happens to the item. And so first, Merlin checks, is it an image? And if it is, convert it to a JPEG, and then resize it to 1,000 pixels. And if it needs to be rotated, rotate it. And then watermark it with an image that's inside of Merlin. So here's the Merlin ID, okay, that it's using to watermark the image. So you can actually have the watermarks stored inside of Merlin. Okay, and then when it's done, it's moving the asset to a Dropbox folder. Okay, And then it's doing the same thing. So look, it's basically one stacked on top of the other. It's saying, oh, go back to the original image, and if it's an image, now convert it to a TIFF, but resize it to 500 pixels. Okay, again, rotate it, convert it to a PNG, watermark it with the color image, and notice this is the same watermarked image, and then it's done, except it's going to put the finished product or the cake into a Dropbox folder. And if we go look at my Dropbox folder, you can see it's already added one of the items in here, okay? And if I go take a look at that, let's open this item up, and it's going to open up in preview because it's a Photoshop image. And you can see it's been sized down to about 500 pixels across. You can tell that it's represented kind of small. And in the upper left-hand corner, I put a watermark, okay? And so that all happened automatically. And in a few moments, we should see the second picture. Actually, here it is, in a different Dropbox folder, and there is the file opening in Photoshop with the watermark in the lower right-hand corner. So this is the larger version of the image as a JPEG, and which is why it opened up in Photoshop for me. So that's an example of a workflow. So you actually saw me drag the item to my workflow target, and then you saw the workflow target acknowledge that it was processing the file, and these are the results of the processing. But this tab is the actual workflow engine, and it's showing you what it did in the background. Okay, and if I want to, I can go look at my dashboard and I can see if there have been any errors or things like that. And so here it's telling me that it ran this process a little while ago, and you can see the log entries for the things that I've done. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions about what I've shown you. I don't see any. So I wanted to show you one other workflow just to give you an idea of things that you can do. Most of you are familiar that if I add something to a collection, okay, so I'm going to add this one to something called archived footage. And now if I go look inside my archived footage, I've got these two items here. And if I drag this same item out of one collection into another, in this case, I'm going to drag it into my landscapes. Okay, so this picture now lives in two locations, even though I dragged it from one collection to another. It's in my landscapes collection, and it's in my archive footage collection. Okay, but we did something special. I've got this special collection inside of a collection folder called Project X. And so if I drag this item to my approval pending collection, okay, if I go look at that, we'll see that item. Here it is. It's the last item in my collection in my approval pending. And what you're not seeing is an email was sent saying, hey, you have new items in your approval pending collection. You should go look at them. And so here they are. And what I can do now is if I take this and drag it from approval pending to either approved or not approved, rather than doing a copy, it's doing a move. And so if I go refresh my approval pending, you can see that that picture of Horseshoe Bend has disappeared because it was moved, it wasn't copied. And if I go look in approved, it's sitting here at the bottom of approved. If I scroll to the bottom, there it is in approved. And another email was sent letting me know, or letting people know, that this item has now been marked as approved. Okay, and this all happened in the background because of a workflow that was set up in the workflow engine. So that's all I have for you today. I'll take a moment to see if you have any questions. The workflow engine is optional. If you've got ideas for things that might be accomplished in your environment with the workflow engine, please contact me or my colleague Randy Simpson, and we'll be happy to discuss with you how the workflow engine might help you solve some of your production problems, and to see if it's useful for you. We'd be happy to talk to you about that.
There are questions, David.
Oh, I'm not seeing them in the chat window. Oh, hang on. There they are. Can you add predefined metadata for a special group? Yes, you could. That's a very good example of a workflow, Jan. So if someone belongs to a special group and I upload content, I can actually add metadata at the time of that. So could this workflow example be triggered on an image when the user imports it into Merlin X? Yes. So again, an import is a potential trigger, and it might even be based on the user or the user group for that particular user that's doing the import. So if I upload content, Merlin can automatically go in and do specific tasks, whether it's automatically outputting that same image at the same time of input. So an input and an output is basically simultaneous, or I can add metadata to it at the time of upload. So Randy, thanks for that. Let's see, we want to send photos to a specific server, let's say AP New York. Actually, you could, but you don't need to use workflow for that, David. You can basically create a server target unless things have changed at the AP. I think they have an FTP folder that they want you to send things to. You probably have an FTP URL and a username and password for that FTP folder. So if you provide that information to us, to someone in customer service, they can create a server target for you that's called send to AP. And in the background on the server is the AP account name and the password. And so anything that you drag into that server target, Merlin will automatically FTP to the Associated Press. And you can have multiple FTP targets because you might have one for AP and you might have one for somebody else. And again, that's all. That doesn't even require the actual workflow engine itself. That's standard Merlin functionality, and we're happy to help you set that up. And another question, when a user imports a photo into Merlin, can it be auto-exported in it? Yes. And rotated, and yes. And exported in a different format? Yes. So that can all be done. So at the time of upload, and again, it might not be all of your content. It might be just some of it. Based on other metadata. And so when you upload the content, Merlin could automatically send this off to your web CMS or to your print production system. So yes, you can do that. So if you want to talk to us about how we might make that work, let Randy or I know, and we'll be happy to discuss it with you. So I think, thanks Randy for noticing that. I was looking in the chat window, not my questions. So awesome. I've got another one here. Is it possible to set a workflow after upload to fill in some metadata looking like tracks? Right now, the workflow engine doesn't know about tracks, so it's not going to grab anything from tracks. But basically, after upload, it could automatically fill in metadata. So, Jan, send me what you think you're looking for, and we'll see if it can do it, and I'll let you know. Okay, so I need a kind of a better example of what you're looking for. The generic answer is yes, we can do that, but I'd like to know specifically what you're looking for. Oh boy, more questions. Okay, thanks. So awesome. So, the workflow engine, incredibly powerful, does all the work in the background for most of your users once it's set up. It's not, it's not super easy, but it's not hard either. So most of the people on this call probably have the skills needed to kind of figure out workflow, especially if you've got the manual in front of you and a couple examples to look at to help dissect what you want to do. So there is a UI for the workflow engine. However, we are happy to set up workflows for you in most of these cases. All right. Everybody, thank you. I'm going to let you have the rest of your Wednesday back. I do appreciate your taking the time to join us. Again, contact Randy and I if you have ideas for specific workflows or solution problems that are looking for solutions. The workflow engine may be that solution. Let us know. We're happy to work with you. Thanks, everybody.